Tonight, I am going to be talking about the chapter 23 in the book In Love with the World by Mingyur Rinpoche. And this chapter is titled The Four Rivers of Natural Suffering. And it's interesting that he uses the word natural suffering because what we're talking about here is birth, aging, sickness, and death, which are natural and unavoidable as a result that they are natural. He says that this is the human condition. So this is day 3 after he has left the guest house in Kushinagar, and he is by the Parinirvana Park where the Buddha had his Parinirvana. So he continues to be sick, and as the day goes by, the seriousness of the situation sinks in with him little by little. And he has thoughts such as, there's no better place to die than where the Buddha died. Maybe that dream I had of being crushed by a boulder was a premonition, and I will be dying here. And thinking, should I go back to the monastery, of course, where it would be safe? And so he recounts this story about this Tibetan that traveled to Lhasa and went to the Potala Palace and looked out one of the windows which had bars in it. And he stuck his head through the bars and he got his head stuck in the window, and now he could not get back out. And he thought maybe he would die there. And of course, what happened was when he relaxed, he found that he could pull his head back through the bars and wouldn't die there. So he tries to relax. He contemplates the question of at death, what dies and what remains. And he kept bringing his mind back to awareness. This seems to be a practice that he focuses on throughout this book, this maintaining awareness the best that he can. On the other hand, he is aware that his mind keeps drifting into fearful thoughts. He thinks of people that he loves, that he cares about, that have been significant to him earlier in his life, especially childhood. And he then recounts the story of a woman, quite possibly a Western woman, who her and her husband had a disagreement in the evening, and he left for work in the morning and never said goodbye. She never said goodbye to him, and he died at work. In fact, he died falling off a high-rise building that he was working on construction. And she was haunted by not telling him how much she loved him, even though they had a disagreement. And so she felt guilty. She felt bad. It's called survivor's guilt. And So the point that he makes from this story and from his remembering and thinking about people that he loved and that he might not see again if he should die is, tell everyone you love today you love them. Don't wait until they are dying, which is pretty good advice. I've heard similar regret with when my best friend was killed. It wasn't anywhere nearly as dramatic as that. They parted company about an hour before he was killed, and she regretted just having parted company with him, that she felt if she would have stayed with him, and he was killed in an accident on the street in a city, that if she would have stayed with him, that she would have somehow or another been able to save him. Now, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche does say that he did tell the people that he left behind how much he cared about them, those that were still alive. And then he reflects, and this is not the last time that he says this or writes this, that it never occurred to me while preparing for the retreat that I might die. And he says that he had embarked upon this retreat because he wanted to be reborn in his present body, to be transformed and to become a greater benefit to beings. That was his motivation for embarking on this retreat. But now it looks like he might have to wait until next life. So he finishes up this section, this chapter, by explaining about the four rivers of natural suffering: birth, aging, sickness, and death. And the point is that we all experience these, but they don't have to cause suffering to the mind. They cause suffering to the body. But the suffering to the body is compounded by the mind by adopting storylines, conceptuality, and so forth. This shouldn't be happening to me. I don't like what is happening to me, and so on and so forth. And so he tells a story about the woman who was alive at the time of the Buddha, and he came to the Buddha with her baby who had just died, and he wanted the Buddha to bring the baby back to life. And he said he would, but first bring me a mustard seed, as many mustard seeds as you can, from a house where no one has died in. And this is India 2,600 years ago. And every house that she went to, and she went to a lot because she was frantic, and asked for a mustard seed, they all had them that they would give her. But when she said, has anyone died here? They all said yes. And when she came back to the Buddha, she had realized that impermanence not only is her baby subject to impermanence, but everybody is subject to impermanence, and that her experience is the common human experience. This COVID pandemic that we're having right now kind of helps bring that home to us too, that in the modern world, people usually do not die at home, they die in hospitals. There is a trend that is gaining popularity of hospice care, where the person dies at home. But even with that, most people die in hospitals. And we are somewhat removed from death in so many different ways in the Western world. Well, what he is trying to teach here is summarized on page 187. Quote, "You can learn to live with death, to make yourself bigger than this loss. Then you can hold the sadness and not drown in the sorrow." So that is the point, to experience the sadness. And it is sad when someone dies, but then drop the conceptuality and accept that this is the human condition. This is a natural occurrence. So that finishes chapter 23. Now on to chapter 24. The title is Recalling the Bardos, in plural. So this is towards dusk of the third day, and he decides to get food. He gets up with difficulty, has difficulty standing, and he realizes that his body has become extremely heavy. And he then reflects on the similarities of going to sleep and the bardo at the time of death. And this involves the dissolution of the 5 elements. So the body has 5 qualities or 5 elements. The quality is solidity, the element is the earth element. Fluidity is the water element, warmth is the fire element, movement is the air element or wind element, and then openness is the space element. At the time of going to sleep, we go through the dissolution of these 5 elements, one into another, but it is very subtle and it's very difficult to be aware of the process. He mentions that some people talk about falling asleep. And that is the first stage of this process, when the earth element dissolves into the water element and the body feels heavy. It feels like it's falling. The next stage is the water element dissolves into the fire element, and there is a sense of floating. Next, the fire element dissolves into the air element. And he really doesn't mention this and the next 2 elements in terms of what the sensation is like as you are going to sleep. But then after the fire element dissolves into the air element, then the air element dissolves into space, and the space element dissolves into consciousness. And he says these elements have existed from beginning of time, and that they arise from emptiness. On page 189, here is a quote. It can be consoling to know that when we die, the sweep of our fleeting lives will bring us full circle back to our most elemental beginnings, end quote. So as the mind enters sleep and we go through these disillusions, we go, and the same thing with the bardo of dying, that it all dissolves back into consciousness, leaving, of course, the body behind, the physical body behind, but everything else dissolves into consciousness, into space. What came to my mind with this quote was that nowadays there is a movement called green burial. And the idea is to help the body compost and decompose as quickly as possible and return to the earth. But this is at a much deeper level than green burial that we're talking about here, where it goes right back to space. The green burial just goes back to, again, thinking that the earth is solid and real, and that delusive appearances are solid and real. Whereas Mingyur Rinpoche here is talking about mind being based in emptiness. And that this acknowledges the delusive aspect of conventional reality. So at the time of death, he goes into this a little bit more detail here, that in the beginning, the earth element dissolves into the water element. And the person who is dying, their strength weakens, and they have this sensation of falling, sinking into the earth, even, he says. Then after that comes the water element dissolving into the fire element. And at this point, the body dries out, the blood slows down its circulation and eventually stops. The lips become parched. And there is an inner experience of floating and also thirst. Next, the fire element dissolves into the air element. And at this point, the body becomes cold. The heart area remains warm for a short while. And the inner experience is that the mind feels like it is burning. When the air element dissolves into space, breathing becomes labored and heavy and difficult. And then the last stage is space dissolving into consciousness. And he doesn't say exactly what this experience is, but he does say that space is the foundational reality of phenomena. including our bodies. That all phenomena need space to occur in, to arise in, and so forth. So now he talks about two different approaches to death by people that he knew. One is his father, the other is another monk who did the first 3-year retreat with him and then assisted him when he was the retreat master for the second 3-year retreat that the Mingyur Rinpoche did. So the two approaches are, and these are both by highly trained Buddhist masters, the conceptual body and with no conceptual body. Both of these two men were not afraid of dying. The close friend had cancer, and when he was close to death, he told Mingyur Rinpoche that he was ready to die. He had trained on the Bardo teachings, and so was prepared for the Bardo, and as a result, he was not afraid to die, and he was ready. But he did tell Mingyur Rinpoche, don't worry about me, but please pray for my body. And quite honestly, he did not say a whole lot about what that meant. I am taking that to mean that he was saying, please pray for me not to experience the physical pain of my body dying from cancer. So Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche says, this means that his attainment had not transcended his body, his physical body. He had not died in the bardo of this life. On 191, quote, as long as we use our flesh and blood bodies and use our sense organs to negotiate relative reality, then we will experience physical pain. So this man was afraid of experiencing physical pain. So dying in the bardo means, dying in the bardo of this life means recognizing luminosity. And this is a term that comes up over and over again in the Bardo teachings. And specifically, this means stable recognition of the child luminosity. This relates to the experience of emptiness, the experience of directly realizing, you might say, seeing for ourselves that our bodies are not solid. They are not they do not appear the way we think they appear. We confused sentient beings. When you recognize this child luminosity and it is stable, and this is the fundamental nature of mind, seeing the fundamental nature of mind without concepts, just seeing it fresh as it is, you might say being aware of your awareness. when you are aware of that and you experience emptiness, which are closely related, then you have recognized the child luminosity. And when it becomes a stable recognition, your body becomes an illusory body. And this is what he means by dying within the bardo of this life. I thought it might be helpful here to go back over what Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said in his book, The Interval of Possibility, which is about the actual bardo between death and birth. And he talks about the mother luminosity and the child luminosity. Another term for it that he uses for the mother luminosity is, quote, ground clear light. And he says this is like the experience of a boundless, clear, cloudless sky. That this is our true nature. This is Buddha nature itself. And everybody experiences this at the time of death. But it's very difficult to recognize unless you have trained in recognizing the child clear light or the child luminosity, then you will not recognize it. And so the training for the bardo is to cultivate the faculties of recollection and alertness, awareness through meditation and studying, contemplating these instructions on the bardo. And as a result of that, when the ground clear light arises, you will recognize it because you had already experienced and recognized the child clear light or the child luminosity. The difference is this, that when we are in our body, we are quite limited because we think that we are our body, and that just plain limits us. When you die and you leave your body, you're no longer limited by the body, and your mind can become much more vast. Again, this ground luminosity. The problem is that it's incredibly intense, and it's so intense that most people just pass out because they can't take it. It's too intense. Rinpoche says the child clear light is like a photograph, and that when at the point of death, the mother clear light arises, that's the actual person. And it is the photograph that allows you to recognize the actual person. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche says that there are three characteristics of meditation and the meditation experience that cultivate this recognition of the child clear light. The first is well-being, a feeling of well-being. Sometimes it's called bliss, just feeling good. The second experience is lucidity. seeing very, very clearly. Without complications. And the third one is non-thought or non-conceptuality. And we can have these experiences when we meditate. And it is important to recognize them. But on the other hand, it is also important to let go of them and not try to prolong them, hold on to them, grasp on them, or whatever. That when these arise, what it means is that our practice has been somewhat effective, and it's time for us to keep practicing and become more effective. And the mother clear light, or the mother luminosity, is endowed with absolute well-being, perfect bliss. He uses the word utter and pure lucidity. And it is completely free of thought and conceptuality. In a few chapters ahead, Mingyur Rinpoche will describe this experience. But I thought it would be important to bring this up at this point when he's talking about this dying to the body in the bardo of living. So going back to the book, the other example of two people that died, that he was close to, this is his father, Tulku Ujin, who was a highly respected Kagyu and Nyingma master. He had attained the illusory body, which means he had stable recognition of emptiness. And this means that he was on the bodhisattva levels, or the bhumis, Bhumis. The first bhumi is not stable. So I am assuming that this means that his father was on the second or a higher bhumi or bodhisattva level. He said, quote, "It looks like I am sick, but actually there is no real conceptual body anymore. I feel fine. Whatever happens, whether it is my time to go or stay, is okay. I am not suffering." That's on page 191. So in Mingyur Rinpoche's words, that his body was no longer a, quote, anchor for his mind, that his father realized that his mind is much bigger than the confines of this body that he was inhabiting at that time. So he experienced, this is Tulku Ujin, he experienced death as a transition, not an end. Now, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche says that his level of accomplishment is close to his friend, the monk, not his father. That he hasn't known the illusory body, and that his understanding in the present of his body is conceptual. So now he talks about the bardos of death in relationship to the bardos of life. He says that if we can accept that we are dying every day, living cannot be separated from dying, then the Bardo teachings become more of a roadmap for our present lifetime, not the end of our present lifetime. He reflected on all the teachings and practices that he had done. And he felt that they all were efforts to wake up and to relate to change, impermanence, death, and rebirth. He uses an example of meditation, that when we meditate, we become familiar with our mind, that we allow the conceptual mind to dissolve and awareness to be recognized within. This is the death of the grasping mind, allowing the conceptual mind to dissolve and awareness to be recognized. And he says that looking back, all the things that he had done in terms of practices were relating to the Bardo of this life and to prepare us for the Bardo of actual dying. So meditating on compassion and loving kindness weakens our attachment to ourself and our body, our sense of self. Contemplating impermanence and death helps us see it is natural, unavoidable, and thus be more realistic and wise. Maintaining awareness when going to sleep is very helpful, especially when you are going through the Bardo of dying. The stages are the same as he has mentioned earlier. All we have to do is go to sleep, but try to aware as much mindfulness through the process as we can. Don't give up. He says on 193, quote, "We can learn a lot by paying attention to the experiences of the mind that transcend the small, limited ego mind. Whether these moments happen on one of our cushions or unprompted glimpses of emptiness or when falling asleep." He gets back to his condition at this point, and he says, "I'm still in denial about how sick I am." It is getting late, and so he tries to do some sleep meditation, paying attention as he falls asleep. This, again, is still the third day since he left the guest house. So all night long, he is getting up to go empty his bowels and perhaps his bladder. And he observes that the sounds that he's hearing, background noise, so to speak, and his mind are not as clear as they were the night before. So now is chapter 25, giving everything away. It is the fourth day, it's in the morning, the fourth day since leaving the guest house. He's staying in this natural area outside the cremation stupa. He's dressed as a Hindu sadhu, and he is extremely sick. So he starts by reflecting on how, regardless of the teachings he received on death and impermanence, it never occurred to him before that he might die during retreat. He is basically telling us, because he knows that we are in the same situation. We might feel that we will die maybe in a year, maybe 2 years, as we're getting old, maybe 5 years, but we definitely do not think, oh, I could die today. I could die this week. I might not reach my next birthday unless we're already having some serious health issues. So he's telling us to look deeply and understand that you can die at any time. You don't have a control of it. And it'll probably happen when you're not expecting it and not ready. On page 195, he has this quote: "This is why the masters shake their head in astonishment that death could ever come as a surprise to anyone, young or old, when the truth is all around us." Again, from my own experience, there will be times when I am acutely aware of my own mortality, but most of the time I'm making long-term plans and thinking that I'm going to live to a ripe old age. I don't make many short-term plans, thinking that I better do this now while I'm still alive, because I might not be alive next week. Or I better do these practices now while I can, because I may need them next week or in 2 weeks. So he points out that the pain of death is a natural pain, just like sickness and aging, which was pointed out in the previous chapter. That the pain and alleviating it is actually not the main subject of the Buddha's teachings that he gave in India. He did give teachings on medicine Buddha, of course, and he did give some Bardo teachings. But the Bardo teachings refer to the pain of being separated from your deepest attachments, your body, your home, your family, and your friends. So he now goes into the mandala practice. And some of you may not have much of an idea of what the mandala practice is, but it is the third practice in Nundro, which is a practice, a serious practice that you do to prepare you for doing more advanced Vajrayana deity practices, and also for doing Mahamudra practice. The full name of Nundro is actually Mahamudra Nundro, meaning that you have to do this before you can receive more profound Mahamudra instructions. He doesn't describe it, the mandala practice, as it would be done in Nundro. But it is interesting that up until this point, he hasn't talked about any chanted practice or mantra that he was doing. And along with that, what I also see in this chapter, when he's talking about offering these objects to beings that are above us, and he is talking about offering to Buddhas and Buddhist deities, but also to the universe, offering it to the sun, offering it to the moon. And he obviously is talking to a wider audience in this book of his. It's not just he's talking to Buddhists, he's talking about to a much wider audience. And well, just because when you receive Nundro instructions on the mandala practice, there are definitely enlightened masters and the Buddha and the Vajrayana deities and so forth that we make the offerings to. We're not making the offerings to the universe, for instance, or the sun. What is important, and this is why he brings this up, that at the time of death, we want to be as free as possible from our attachments, as free as possible from our habitual patterns and our mental conditioning, so that we can be as fully present in the moment as possible. Which is really good advice at any time during our lives in the bardo of this life. That if we can let go of much of this as possible, we will have less baggage on our path, less baggage to carry, less baggage to cloud our minds, and so forth. So this is a very good approach to life in general, and that is, again, to identify our attachments and free ourselves from them and habitual and mental conditioning. To help do this with the mandala practice, we just offer up whatever we have that has value. This is the difference between giving away things that we no longer want or that are broken, and offering up those objects that we have a strong attachment for. In this practice, feelings of regret, nostalgia, remorse, sadness, they are acknowledged. But then we let these memories and thoughts and concepts and so forth, to let them go, like guests passing through a guest house. Me and mine indicate our most intense bonds, he says. Quote, in the bardo of dying to free ourselves of attachments, we combine letting go, letting be, giving away, and making offerings. And a quote that's on 197. So we offer things that are familiar to us ordinary beings in this life. We can offer people that we care for, objects, mountains, rivers. We offer to the Buddha, we offer to our Lama. And then he says, offer to the universe and the stars. And this is not found, at least in the traditional teachings I have received on Nundro, and specifically the mandala practice. So we need to avoid ego attachment to how big your offerings are, how generous you are, and so forth. This generosity that we are, you might say, dipping into using when we are making these mandala offerings come from respect to the recipient of the offerings. And this could be the deities, it could be the Buddha, it could be various lineage masters from the present and the past, and so forth. And it comes from gratitude towards what these lineage masters have done to preserve the Dharma so that they are easily accessible for us. And then also gratitude and devotion. This helps free ourselves as being a reference point. At this point, he now switches to the traditional mandala offering. And I want to point out that the mandala offering, the liturgy, the chanted liturgy might vary from place to place, text to text, and so forth, but it is included in many Vajrayana practices, as it is a very, very important practice. I lead Yongey here at the Hay River Karma Tegsum Choling, and there is a mandala offering that is done in every session. In the morning session, there it is done twice. And so it is very important. Frequently when a great teacher begins teachings, there will be a ceremony which is basically inviting the teacher to teach. And during that ceremony, then there will be a mandala offering made. You'll have a procession of people making the mandala offering. There will actually be a mandala pan, and it'll be held by one of the participants. Rice will be piled up on it as the chanting is done. And basically, we are offering up the wealth of the universe. And at the end of a ceremony or extensive teaching, sometimes an extensive ceremony, where then the participants will have a chance to go up and make an offering to the Lama, that there will be another elaborate mandala offering and a procession. They would do this at KTD at the end of the 10-day teachings that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche would give. So some of you have been out there for that and have experienced this mandala offering. And some of you have been here for Yongey and have actually chanted this mandala offering. He says that he has been doing this. This is Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, that he has been doing a short mandala practice daily in his liturgy, daily liturgy. And I found this interesting because up until this point, he has not talked about chanting. and saying mantra and so forth. But I take that to mean that he has been doing this during the retreat. It's easy. A person like Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche would have memorized these prayers a long time ago when he was little. It is stressed in the training to memorize these prayers that are done regularly. So he would not need to have texts for him to chant these liturgies. So anyway, boundless generosity is imagined in the mandala practice. And it is imagined by giving boundless offerings, a universe full of offerings. And we give things like mountains, continents, worlds, universes, an inconceivably vast amount of objects. On page 197, quote, by giving away phenomena that are impersonal and inconceivable, we reconfigure our place in the universe. And this helps disrupt our egotistical patterns and our limitations. It disrupts our small ego mind and kind of helps us become introduced to this vast mind of egolessness. At this point, he again expresses that he never, ever thought that he might die during the 3-year or the 4-year wandering retreat that he had planned. And now here he is. I'm not sure exactly how many days since he left the Tergar Monastery in Bodh Gaya, but it probably isn't much more than 30 days at most. So he starts doing this expanded mandala practice. Here it's more, it's not following a liturgy, it's just going along and offering what feels comfortable for him. He gets very personal. So he began with a mountain that he could see in his village as a child. And nostalgia arises for his family, his childhood memories. He takes note of this and lets them pass. So he notices that without storylines, that these memories quickly pass. The memories come and go as long as we don't attach storylines to the memory. Just be aware of the memories, recognize them, but then let them go. Then he shifts to wealth. And this is interesting, and it's a very good point. And that is that here, wealth is anything that we treasure regardless of monetary value. We offer what we are attached to. And a couple of things came to my mind at this point. One, I was attending it was a 3-day ceremony down in Chicago, way back, it was at least 30 years ago. And at the end of the 3rd day, there was a place to make offerings to the great Lama that had presided over these ceremonies and gave a very extensive Vajrayogini empowerment. And so there was a very long line of people making offerings because a lot of people attended. And it was pretty standard. The offerings were made, the kata was taken by the Lama and then placed over the head of the person that made the offerings. An attendant took the offering, put them aside, and so forth. And then suddenly the Lama, the Rinpoche, stopped and held up this baseball hat. And he said, "This is an excellent offering." And I took that to mean that through his eye of wisdom, he understood that the man that offered it was very attached to this hat, even though it had really almost no monetary value. Who wants an old baseball hat unless it's a collector hat? And I'm sure this was not a collector hat, and I'm sure Marpa was not a hat collector. The other thing that came to mind was back in 1987, I went through a divorce and we held an auction here because we had to split up our property 50-50, and if I ended up with more property than my wife, a former wife, I would have to reimburse her for what I had over the value of what she had. And quite honestly, both of us realized at this time that we had a lot of stuff that neither one of us wanted. And what surprised me, and again, it probably shouldn't have, but what surprised me was these objects, these household objects and some farm equipment and so on and so forth, that I felt were so valuable. The public didn't seem very interested at all in spending money on them. And it was a real education in value, that we can value our possession very, very highly. And when it comes right down to it, they're really not that valuable. So the important thing is when we offer objects that we figure have a monetary value on them in terms of our attachment to them, that the more attached the object is that we offer, the better the offering. And interestingly enough, he says we can offer political philosophies, political views, very appropriate at this time of 2020 here, about a month and a half away from the election. That we can offer philosophies that we are attached to, ideologies. We can offer our conflicting emotions, our anger, greed, pride, jealousy, whatever arouses emotions in us. We can offer our emotions. On page 199, he says, every release of whatever we identify as me and mine deals a small death blow to ego. And every decrease of ego domination increases our access to our own inner wisdom.